What is blood? Blood is Latin for hema, and it's the fluid that flows through your veins and arteries. Its function is to bind, support, and anchor other tissues. The matrix of the blood is called plasma, and blood is the body's internal highway. It transports dissolved gases, nutrients, metabolic waste, and hormones throughout the body. It also stabilizes pH and temperature. It prevents fluid loss by clotting, and it plays a role in the defense against toxins and pathogens. What is blood made of? When a blood sample is centrifuged, the result is hematocrit. 55% of blood is plasma. 1% consists of the white blood cells, or leukocytes and platelets, also known as the buffy coat. The remaining 45% of blood is made up of the red blood cells, or the erythrocytes. The 46% of the red blood cells and the white blood cells make up the formed elements. The formed elements are the red blood cells and the white blood cells in the blood, such as the lymphocytes, monocytes, neutrophils, eosinophils, basophils, megakaryocytes, and the platelets. Of the 55% of the plasma, 92% of it consists of water, 7% is proteins, and the remaining 1% is other solutes. The proteins in the blood consist of albumin, which helps maintain water balance, and it's a factor in the colloid osmotic pressure. Another protein is fibrinogen, which is important for blood clotting, along with globulins such as immunoglobulins like antibodies and transport globulins. Finally, there's also the regulatory proteins such as hormones and enzymes. The other solutes making up the 1% are the electrolytes such as sodium and chloride, nutrients such as glucose, lipids, carbohydrates, and amino acids. Waste such as urea are also another solute. Hematocrit is what forms when a blood sample is centrifuged. It's the percentage of the formed elements, and the formed elements are mostly red blood cells, with 1% being white blood cells and platelets. Hematocrit levels are influenced by testosterone. Men have higher hematocrit levels, meaning they have more red blood cells. Hematocrit is also influenced by disease and altitude. Hematocrit increases with altitude. As seen here, it increases as climbers scaled Mount Everest, and this is because of the limited oxygen supply. Red blood cell formation is known as erythropoiesis. The life of an erythrocyte starts as an erythroblast in the bone marrow, which then develops into reticulocytes, which are immature red blood cells, and they're in the blood for 1 to 2 days. It's called a reticulocyte because there's only ribosomes left, called a reticulum. Reticulocytes then develop into erythrocytes, which flow through the blood, and they have a lifespan of 120 days. Hemolytic anemia is the destruction of the mature red blood cells, resulting in a high reticulocyte count, raising the hematocrit levels. And aplastic anemia is damaged stem cells, causing a low reticulocyte count, resulting in a lower hematocrit count. There's 5 types of white blood cells, also known as leukocytes, and they are characterized based on their appearance. Some have granules in the cytoplasm and others do not. The leukocytes live outside of the blood vessels, and they wait for a signal to enter the bloodstream. Diapedesis is the migration of the blood cells from the blood vessels into the tissues, and leukopodesis is the migration of leukocytes into the tissue, and they move by chemotaxis to areas of damage. There's 4.5 to 11,000 leukocyte cells per cubic meter, and their function is defense. They remove toxins, wastes, damaged or abnormal cells, and pathogens. Leukocytes are classified based on the appearance of the cytoplasm. They are granular or agranular. The granulocytes are the acidophils or the eosinophils, the basophils, and the neutrophils. The agranular leukocytes are the lymphocytes and the monocytes. Something significant to note about the granulocytes is that they are polymorphonuclear. The lymphocytes are the B cells, the T cells, and the NK cells. They have a very large nuclei that's almost spherical with a little indent. The cells have very little cytoplasm, and they make up 2 to 8% of the leukocytes. The B cell's function is defense through humoral immunity. They attack bacteria and viruses, and they also produce antibodies. B cells are formed in the bone marrow, and when they are called to action, they differentiate into more specialized cells, such as plasma cells, which produce, store, and release antibodies. The T cell's function is in defense. They target cells that are marked and they destroy them. T cells are formed in the bone marrow, where they then migrate to the thymus, where they mature. And when they are called to action, they become cytotoxic T cells in tissues, which bind to cells and destroy them. A good mnemonic is to remember T cell development is T for thymus. AIDS is where the thymus shuts down and it can't produce more T cells. And experimental drugs are being developed to stimulate the thymus as a treatment for AIDS. Monocytes have a kidney-shaped nuclei. They are agranular and they have lots of cytoplasm. They are the biggest leukocyte cell with a diameter of 15 to 30 micrometers, and they make up about 5% of the leukocytes. Their function is in phagocytosis. They eat dead cells and bacteria. Monocytes become macrophages in tissues, and they have a relatively slow migration to the site of infection. Monocytes live in the blood for 1 to 3 days, where they then migrate out, and they can live for up to 100 days in the tissue. Neutrophils have lobe nuclei, commonly 3 to 5 lobes with connected chromatin. They are granular, and they make up 60 to 70% of the leukocytes. Neutrophils also contain a bar body, which marks for gender, and it's only found in females. Neutrophils stay in the blood for hours. They then enter the tissues. They stay in the tissues until they die of old age or until they are killed by what they are trying to kill. Neutrophils are the first responders. They are very fast-moving cells. They destroy their targets via phagocytosis, and they release lysosomal enzymes from granules that kill bacteria. They increase the production of hydrogen peroxide to kill bacteria during phagocytosis, and they die after one burst of activity in a process known as netosis, where the cell releases its chromatin and granular contents into the extracellular space, forming a net that will trap the surrounding bacteria, where they will then be degraded by macrophages. Neutrophils are always present in tissues that are exposed to microorganism invasion, such as the lungs and the gut. When the demand for neutrophils is very high, they are released from the bone marrow before they are fully mature. These are known as band neutrophils, and they have a horseshoe-shaped nucleus. These cells didn't have time to segment their nucleus into the characteristic lobes. Acidophils, also known as eosinophils, have granules that are stained red, and they have a lobe nucleus, commonly 2 lobes, and they make up 2 to 4% of the leukocytes. They are involved in allergic responses and asthma. They fight off parasites. Their granules release proteolytic enzymes that kill. They phagocytose antigen-antibody complexes. They are called acidophils because they love acidic dyes. And a good studying mnemonic is A for asthma and allergies. Eosinophilia is an elevated number of eosinophils, and is a symptom of a number of diseases and infections such as parasites, asthma, and cancer. Eosinophilia becomes a problem when there is a lot of cells, at the levels of 5,000 eosinophils per microliter, where the normal levels are less than 500. The accumulation of eosinophils in the tissue can be harmful because their granules contain proteolytic enzymes that can kill. Normally this is good for killing parasites, but when the response is prolonged, they end up killing healthy cells in the tissue. They also secrete cytokines that recruit more cells and prolong the immune response, causing further damage. Basophils have tons of granules, and they are very rare. They make up less than 1% of the leukocytes. They are called basophils because they love basic dyes. Their function is to release granules into the interstitial fluid in the damaged tissues. The granules contain heparin, which is an anticoagulant, and histamine, which increases the permeability of the blood vessels. The basophils are also phagocytic, but they have very weak activity. Megakaryocytes are huge cells that are found in the bone marrow. Megakaryocyte means large nucleus cell, and they have a large irregular nuclei. Their cytoplasm buds off to form platelets, which are small cell fragments, 1 to 3 micrometers in size, which are the small ink dots in the illustration. One megakaryocyte can make 4 million platelets before being phagocytosed. Every day, 200 billion new platelets enter the bloodstream to take the place of those that were used or destroyed. Megakaryocytes produce platelets, which produce enzymes and factors important for clotting. Some of these factors include thromboplastin, which makes prothrombin turn into thrombin, which is cleaved by the clotting process, and makes soluble fibrinogen turn into fibrin. During tear repair, there's a platelet plug where platelets adhere to the collagen in the vascular wall. Fibrin fibers then reinforce the plug. Factors released from the platelets trigger the formation of a fibrin meshwork. There is then the blood clot formation, which traps other cells such as platelets and the red blood cells, and then the vessel repairs.